Vi ska prata om Almedalsveckan, fenomenet som har vuxit enormt. Och den här veckan är det 3300 seminarier här i Visby. Närmare 1000 journalister bevakar evenemanget. Och en av dem som är på plats är Max Foster från CNN som är Londonkorrespondent. Very welcome, Mr. Foster.
Great to be here.
What makes you come to Visby, little Visby, in the middle of the summer?
Well, that's what's amazing about it, isn't it? It is little Visby. I remember coming up here, growing up, coming over here, and it was this lovely holiday town. And this is just the idea that you've got all of the Swedish political elite coming to this island in one place from all the different parties is amazing. It just wouldn't happen in the UK or the US, where they have, you know, one event for one party, another event for another party. It wouldn't all happen in one place. I think it's amazing and alive.
What's so special with it?
I think it's the fact that you've got all the different political views represented in one place, the fact that you have politicians walking amongst the public who can literally go up to them and speak to them. I think that's, you know, I'm sure there is security here, but I haven't seen anyone. Maybe they're wearing shorts.
We actually saw a tweet, one of your tweets today, where you wrote that here we can see Swedish political leaders wearing
Maybe not
shorts.
leaders, but it's that idea that it's so casual and relaxed and so open. I think it's amazing, and perhaps uniquely Scandinavian, actually. That idea where everything's so fair and accessible and relaxed.
What is your view on Swedish politicians generally?
Well, maybe it's just the current crop you have, but people like Carl Bildt and his tweets, you mentioned Twitter, and the Prime Minister, the way they speak and the way they talk to the media is very relaxed, very open, very authentic. There's no briefing beforehand from my experience. You just get to talk about what you like, and it's like having a chat. Whereas I find that in other parts of Europe, there's a lot more planning goes into these interviews, a lot more guarded, and you don't necessarily feel that you're always getting the truth. But I think when you speak to Swedish politicians, it feels more honest and authentic at the moment.
Do the other countries' politicians do they take any impression from the Swedish political culture?
Well, you may know that David Cameron in the UK is pretty obsessed with Sweden. So we often hear about these Swedish success stories from him. And the schooling system is something he looks at. And I think that's what's interesting about this election, because schooling, obviously in the Swedish election, is a big issue, and perhaps how some of the systems haven't worked. So I think the rest of the world has this idea of this sort of Swedish utopian society where people are willing to pay high taxes, everything's done locally, everything works really well. But actually, with a shifting government, does that mean that actually the system isn't working as well as the rest of the world thinks? So it might be a bit of a wake-up call to this sort of utopian brand that you've got around the world.
There has also been some there has been riots in the suburbs and so on. What would you say about the picture of Sweden right now in
Well, that was an
media?
interesting story, and it's one of the stories that really did make international headlines, because it was a shock. You didn't expect that to happen. And I think, I mean, there is an issue, if you take Stockholm as an example, where I think it's actually about wealth, isn't it? The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. It's happening in France, it's happening in the UK, and it's happening in Sweden. Then you have the emergence of these far-right parties, which are saying, well, actually, perhaps part of that discussion is to do with the fact that there's lots of immigration through Europe. I don't necessarily think it is a sort of racism issue always, it's an economic issue. But, you know, you're going to be the first test case in this country. You know, you had a far-right party that did well in the European elections, same as France and the UK, but will it translate international elections? And I think that's going to be a big story for the world if SD does well.
What do you think about that?
Well, it's going to be interesting for the world to see. And, you know, can they convince the wider electorate that they're not an extreme party and that they can represent the public on a variety of different issues? In the UK, UKIP, their biggest problem is that what are their policies beyond immigration? But actually, you know, they're breaking through when there's a lot of people disillusioned with party leaders who are all at the centre, and you can't really tell what they're about, and they're not very strong leaders at the moment, whereas you have someone like Michael Farage, or Farage in the UK, who's a strong leader and has one clear issue, and people can understand that. But when it comes to the crunch, they vote for that person to lead the country, lead schools, lead hospitals, and lead all sorts of issues. We don't know, and I'm sure it's the same debate here.
Really. Back to Almedalsveckan. Has it gone too big? Has it grown too much?
Well, for me, I think it's great that everyone's here. I don't know what it was like a few years ago. You can probably tell me better. Was it more intimate? Could you get more access? The fact that you've got everyone here and they are approachable, I think, is a great opportunity. And even when business leaders are coming in, if it can become bigger than a political event.
Could it be exported to other countries?
I think the idea is really attractive, but logistically, how do you make it happen in somewhere like the UK, where you've got the three main parties? It's not traditional. So how do you convince them that they should all come together? I just don't think they would agree. They don't agree on anything anyway.
Can you give us some interesting interiors from your experience interviewing Swedish politicians?
Only that it's very conversational and chatty, and they're very worldly aware. I think Swedish politicians seem to understand the world and international events much better than some other politicians in other countries who are far too enclosed. But then it's a smaller country, perhaps, and you have very close relationships with your neighbours, so you've always been outwardly looking as well.
You have also been a royal correspondent for CNN for quite a lot of time. What's your view on the Swedish royal family?
Well, you just keep having royal weddings.
All the time.
Every year there's a new royal wedding. We've only had one in the UK.
And babies all the time as well.
What's fascinating about Scandinavian royalty is how, again, we're talking about here how accessible politicians are, very accessible royals as well, where you see them walking through the streets. And I've had quite a lot to do with the Danish royals, for example, and they take their kids to school, and that would never happen in the UK. So they're more approachable. And, throughout Europe, you've got a younger generation of royalty coming through. They're married to commoners, if I can call them that. And they are younger and they're more in touch with people, their subjects, I think. And that's a very interesting trend. You got it in Spain, you got it in the Netherlands, the UK, across Europe.
But this fact that they marry ordinary people, how will that affect monarchy? Will the Swedish monarchy survive?
Monarchy's always got to reflect the public, and it's got to progress with generations. So I think it's a generational shift, and I think our generation now, don't stick to our own social classes. We mix between social classes, and people can progress through society much easier than they could in the past. I just think it's a reflection of that. And I think if they stuck to the aristocracy, perhaps they would be seen as aloof and elite. So I think it's actually strengthened them.
Okay. What's your program for the rest of the day?
Well, for this evening we have an event. Carl Bildt will be joining us for a panel. We're talking about Ukraine. Part of this whole great event, so that's going to be really interesting. And he's pretty opinionated on Ukraine, and he's got a lot of experience on Ukraine, so we'll wait to see what he has to say. Also a former national security advisor in the US will also be adding to that debate. I mean, why does Ukraine matter to the rest of the world? And this concern about Russia. I'm very keen to ask Carl Bildt one question. He recently told the Financial Times that Vladimir Putin has done us all a favor. That's my first question to Carl Bildt.
Thank you very much, Max Foster, for coming.